So, what's the purpose of the law? Well, Scripture actually tells us the purpose of the law. And think of it this way, there are kind of three purposes laid out in Scripture. The first use of the law really falls to the government, where the government has been instituted by God for the punishing of evildoers. So the law is used to define what an evildoer is, and the government then, by punishing the evildoers, curbs evil in the world, and by doing so gives a free hand to the gospel, so the gospel can be preached. The second use of the law is the primary use, and we'll talk about that in Romans chapter 3, where the law is given specifically for the purpose of pointing out the fact that you are a sinner, and that lays the groundwork for the gospel so that you understand your need for Jesus to bleed and die for you. But we're also going to see that Christians now have a relationship to the Ten Commandments, and the Ten Commandments now define for us what a good work is. We're not saved by our good works. We do our good works because we are Christians. That's the idea. And so we're going to see how the Ten Commandments in particular kind of get rolled back into the New Testament, with one exception, really, and that's the exception regarding the Sabbath, because the Sabbath is a ceremonial law. Now, another important distinction then, when we look at the Old Testament, we recognize that there are moral laws that are universal, and they are always, in effect, they reflect the very nature of God. So the moral law is in effect, and in the moral law, there's laws pertaining to our relationship with God, as well as our relationships to each other. Then there's ceremonial law, which no one is required to keep these anymore. They've all been fulfilled. They were type and shadow pointing to Christ. And then there are the civil laws of ancient Israel, which in many ways you can kind of describe them as coming out of the moral law. It's the legal ramifications of the moral law and the Ten Commandments, and how it plays out then in how we interact with each other. So the idea then is that we have to rightly understand the law's purpose, and it was never designed to save us, ever. And so many people who overreact to the law overreact because they were taught either implicitly or explicitly that salvation is in full or in part based upon our good works, our obedience to the law. But Scripture is very clear that that's not how that works. So